All right. Thank you, Jimar. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be with you today. I am Jimar Wilson, the market leader for Southern California at Enterprise Community Partners. Many of you are familiar with Enterprise. We are a 40-plus-year-old organization, national nonprofit, all things affordable housing. We have offices across the country. Our footprint is national, and we have, you'll see from the slide, you see Southern California Solutions overview. We have a Solutions division, one of our three, the other two being our Capital division, and the other being our Development division. Development division, that's the one that is actually doing actual affordable housing development. Most of that activity is concentrated in the Northeast. We're headquartered in Maryland. Our Capital division is quite familiar to most. That's where we provide our capital through our loan fund and light tech equity through our syndication group. So that's our CDFI type activity. Our solutions division is one where we primarily center more of our programmatic and policy work. So we work in tandem with our other divisions in our office. Our programmatic work is one where we are providing that technical assistance and some capital to our ground zero community partners throughout our footprint. So I'll just share a little bit about what we are doing in SoCal programmatically and policy wise. A lot of our work is in concert with our Northern California office. We try to show up in Sacramento as one voice as best we can. But there are some programmatic nuances between us. And then our other markets across the country are working on things that are very similar, maybe different, named differently, but there are some different priorities by region. So let me see if I can get this going. Briefly, this is our these two slides are folks on our team. We have basically three primary programmatic areas. One is our homelessness work, or what we call our supportive housing work. The other is our capital solutions and partnerships work, and then our what we call our sustainable connected communities work. That's more of our place-based work, which includes our growing work in climate resilience and within affordable housing. You see a few openings. One of them we're looking. We have some of those that are slated to be filled. Just can't name folks just yet until the ink is dry. But this is our small but mighty team, and we're all based in Southern California throughout greater Los Angeles. Uh, Enterprise SoCal, our general footprint is officially all of Southern California, so north to SLO and in Kern County, down to the border. A lot of our work historically has been centered in greater Los Angeles, and in great part is because that's where many of our funders who support our work, kind of drive our work. However, we do have capital activity all throughout Southern California, and I am looking to increase our presence and our work in San Diego, Orange County, and the Inland Empire as well. Don't have that many slides, but this is probably the one that is the most painful to watch because the text is so tiny. But this is just a sampling of just some of the things we've been working on in the past couple of years. Enterprise being an organization that focuses on low-income housing tax credits, we tend to focus on mission-driven nonprofit affordable housing developers. In recent years, we have expanded our preservation focus to include supporting small mom and pop property owners who in our state everywhere do represent the great majority of our affordable housing. And so during the pandemic, we launched a program in partnership with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to deploy some capital to property owners who were experiencing challenges with rental arrears. And then to also help them with some deferred maintenance and to help them stabilize and grow their asset to reason with the thought that we want to make sure that our our affordable housing stock that's represented in this small, medium multifamily space is preserved, and so that the owners are not forced to have to sell to the private market, to institutional investors who might not be as amenable to keep properties, to keep rents affordable. I won't go through this entire list, but some of the ways we provide TA is through academies. We've had 2 academies in the last year, one on preservation and one on climate resilience. The one on preservation was in collaborative with our NorCal partners, where we provided several seminars, I think it might have been like 11 webinars on different topics in the preservation space, followed by a small cohort that received some deeper technical assistance. We did the same thing in climate with our Climate Resilience Academy with our Northern California and Pacific Northwest markets, to really help bring our affordable housing partners in line with what's happening with the coming mandates around electrification and decarbonization, and all the different climate risks that are associated with their portfolios. Similar concepts. So the next slide. As I mentioned, a lot of our work has been focused on preservation. As an organization, we'll always be supporting new construction of affordable housing, but we also recognize the need to preserve our existing housing stock. That includes our traditional light tech properties, but that also includes, again, those small, medium multifamily, those 2 to 20 unit apartment buildings that dominate our affordable housing landscape in our communities. And then also our permanent supportive housing stock. It's aging, experiencing so much risk, covenant risk, financial risk, physical risk. And so we are working with local and public agencies to get some carve outs from current capital sources that typically focus just on new construction, but to steer some of those funds, or even bring together to bear some new funds that are focused on preserving our existing housing stock. I already mentioned the academy that we launched in late 2022. You see, that's this bottom bullet. We were in play to be the TA provider for the foreclosure intervention housing preservation program, state level program. And obviously, with all of our state budget challenges, and I'm sure you've seen the governor's his revise. It's that program is in limbo right now, but it's stood to deploy roughly $485 million to organizations to help capture properties that were at risk of foreclosure, in order to help preserve and create new affordable housing. But that's just an example of a state contract that we were going after, and I'm crossing my fingers that there's still hope there for that. I mentioned our small medium multifamily pilot program that was primarily based in South LA, and we did this in partnership with the local community partner Coalition for Responsible Community Development. They were our boots on the ground. And just some of the successes of the program, we were able to support 52 small multifamily property owners, most of them identified as BIPOC, and were actually residents of the community. Again, it was rental arrears, some grants for repairs, and we were able to protect some homes, and we're still working on a proof of concept to think about how we might want to scale this to other markets, other neighborhoods and communities in Southern California. So if there is any interest there from any of you on this call, we'd love to have a follow-up with you. EPF, Equitable Path Forward. This is a national program, a 5-year program through which we are trying to increase the amount of BIPOC developers into our affordable housing space, particularly those who want to be but have had barriers, access barriers for different reasons. So we have launched a capital program and also an advisory services program by which we are helping developers to learn the ins and outs of our affordable housing ecosystem, public financing, negotiating, the capital stack, and all those great things that you traditional affordable housing folks know and love. But we definitely want to uh, advance this program. We have this model going on throughout the country. The lion's share of the BIPOC developers who have been beneficiaries of this program have been concentrated in the South, but we're looking to grow that here. Homelessness obviously is our central focus. Many organizations are focusing on homelessness, but where one area where we focus in on our solution side is primarily in two ways. One, it's preserving our existing PSH stock, and right now focus primarily on LA County. So we do risk assessments of our aging housing portfolios with our partners, and we try to uplift those pain points to captive audiences, whether it be elected officials, public agencies, so they can just be aware of the challenges that our partners are facing and the portfolios are facing. The second area of two is really what we call our systems change work, and this is where we are addressing challenges in our coordinated entry system. So we are advancing solutions to address the bottlenecks in that system that prevent people from getting our unhoused neighbors from getting placed. Some of you know that process should take, if done well, two weeks to a month. Right now, the process to get someone placed is taking well over 6 months, and it's still a challenge. And not only is it just a challenge to get someone placed, but obviously the matching process through which someone could get placed and then be right back on the streets days later, weeks later, because it was not a proper match, is also exacerbating the system. So many of you know this, but we also have a utilization problem. Like there actually are a lot of units that have been built for affordable housing for our unhoused neighbors that are currently sitting vacant for no other reason that this matching system has too many holes in it. So we are actively working with interested parties to try to improve that system. Page of one of our recent reports on our PSH housing stock. Some of the things we're doing going forward. We also convene, so we have several working groups. We are getting the PSH providers and operators together. We're also bringing together, CAS leadership, public agencies, getting them at the table, because we're also learning that a lot of the issue is just these different groups talk in silos, and we're trying to help break down those walls. Again, I mentioned our sustainable connected communities work. Again, this is our place-based work where we have about 10 community-based CDCs that are receiving some direct technical assistance. We have a big focus on what we call partner sustainability. So we are focused on portfolios and aging housing stock, new construction, but we also know that our organizations themselves are struggling just to meet payroll and to operate as an organization. So we're thinking about ways that we can sustain our partners so that we can mitigate challenges that we saw experience with one of our great organizations, Skid Row Housing Trust. We are actively trying to make sure that we're uplifting pain points from our organization. So obviously right now, the big insurance challenge of our day is one where we are trying to take a leadership effort to uplift those pain points to the state insurance commissioner and other audiences so that we can get our community partners some relief. This has been a trusted group. This SEC group meets every 2 weeks. There have been lulls, but the group really finds this as a safe space to really just talk to each other and to uplift pain points to us, and gives us a great sounding board, feedback loops when we are interfacing with other decision makers. I mentioned our sustainability and decarb work. We're trying to prepare our community partners for the coming mandates to make sure that they're not left behind, two, they are not overly burdened, that their residents are not overly burdened from a cost standpoint, and then proactively that our community groups are able to benefit from the coming capital and infusion and focus and resources within this space. Some of you may have heard that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, EPA has made their award, enterprise through an entity called Power Communities with a few other organizations. We won a $2 billion award. So we actually are in process now of thinking about how and when we will launch deployment of the funds that are meant to support both new construction and existing affordable housing stock. So we're excited about that as well. And let's see, I think I will stop there. Last thing I'll add is that we are also thinking about how we will show up around uh, faith-based development. So we are actively talking with houses of worship. We have been for the last couple of years, but now with our growing enabling environment that allows for affordable housing to sort of get fast-tracked on public land and houses of worship, we are in the early stages of developing a large-scale program that will help our houses of worship make decisions on whether or not they want to get into affordable housing, and if they do, to do it in the most thoughtful way. I will stop there. Melanie, I don't know if this was an opportunity for folks to be able to take questions, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Jimar. I did place in the chat. So if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or to drop them in the chat. But I have a question. So what is the best way for collective members to interact, right, with all these, vibrant programs you described? I mean, especially with having such a small group, this is a really big lift, right, for the SoCal region, for your team. But still, with that in mind, how does our region, or how does our collective members, better become a part of these different initiatives? Because very applicable to our region, but I know less active. How do we join that, or what's the proper avenues in connecting with you and your team and so forth?
Sure. Well, you are welcome to reach out to anyone on our team. But obviously, you can definitely reach out to me directly. You'll have my contact information, and I can either engage the appropriate parties on my team, and also it could be someone that we engage that's at our national program level who supports our work. Uh, uh, I am actually interested in bringing some representation to our leadership council from the Inland Empire. I've been in this seat for 3 years now, and so I am looking to, amplify our presence in other markets outside of LA. Some of that starts with just making sure that we have folks from different regions at the table. And one of our tables, again, is our Southern California Leadership Council, which meets once a quarter. It's more of it's not a board. It's really advisory. An opportunity to hear firsthand from folks in the field what they are seeing, to be a feedback loop for us as we think about program design and program tweaks as we see them. And so that's one thing that I would love to talk with you more about, to see if what would be the path to get some of that representation. Other than that, when we convene activities, we convene symposiums. We'll be issuing a invitation for folks to apply for Section 4. If there's some way that I can get that information to you, Melanie, to make sure that it's more widely distributed, so that we're not missing anybody. That's one other touch point that we could have directly. But long way of saying, you feel free to reach out to me directly.
Awesome. So what about I was thinking, I know you guys have a local newsletter, is that the best way to stay attuned to like the new programs and just everything that's kind of coming down the pipeline or updates? And I mean, this is a great update just to kind of see where everything was at. But is there a best practice for folks who are maybe can't be a part of leadership council but want to stay attuned to the work, the pilots, and even the results and outcomes that you guys are producing, your learnings, is following, on a newsletter, or do you guys have, or your symposiums and gatherings focused on distributing that information and so forth?
Yeah, I definitely recommend a newsletter. We have, like, every market has their own newsletter within enterprise, but there's also in between the actual newsletter, which every other month, once a quarter cadence, we put out blog posts pretty frequently, whether directly from our on our website. They're pushed out there, so you can subscribe to several things on our website, not just the SoCal newsletter, but you can subscribe by topic, by practice area, and get any number of updates. Also, we're pretty active on our LinkedIn page as well, our national LinkedIn page. So there's a lot of content coming there from there all the time. We're getting better at putting names on there for folks to reach out to follow up on. So yeah, those are other touch points as well.
Awesome. I don't know, sorry, Greg, did you have a question? I saw you had just unmuted yourself. Maybe you don't, but, oh, and I see Jesse's hand is raised. Jesse, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. We have a couple more minutes. Yeah, go for it.
Jimar, great presentation. Thank you very much for sharing. I had some questions about your equity or equitable path forward program. Is it solely focused on multifamily, or is there a home ownership component?
Good question. It is focused primarily on multifamily.
Okay.
It's capital at the organization level and also at the deal level, and then it's advisory services, but it's primarily focused on multifamily.
Okay. Would there be an interest in incorporating maybe a for sale component to this education, and even maybe a manufactured specific focus as well? Because we'd love to collaborate on something like that. We're already working on something internally, because we get approached a lot by small mom and pop developers, mostly BIPOC, and they're interested in, they own land and they're trying to figure it out. And we don't have right now the capacity to be providing this type of TA, but would love to figure this out. Something we've been talking about a lot. And so this is a similar program that we were thinking about, but more on specific to for sale or utilizing manufactured homes.
Thanks for that. We are Ruby Harris on our team. She's the senior director of Capital Solutions. She's leading our local EPF advisory work. She and I have been talking about expanding our capital work to include rural and tribal communities in Southern California, as well as other housing typologies. And I don't know that I'm able to say that yes, we are definitely exploring looking at for sale home ownership, but to the extent that we're talking about the small developments, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 unit, I think that we know that there's going to have to be some room for that. So this is a long way of saying we need to increase our learning about where the demand is and where the opportunity is for us, where we could be helpful. But I would actually be, I'm sure Ruby and I would love to sit with you and kind of ideate on what your needs are, and then seeing if there's a connection there.
Absolutely love to. And the tribal and rural communities is something that we're focused on now. There was a big price application coming up as well to provide some. And I met somebody actually I want to say it was an OFN conference maybe, or the interagency conference that from Enterprise. It's going to be hosting something specific to tribal in September. So we'll be participating in that. So I love the direction you guys are moving into, and I'd love to share with you any information or insight we have to help you all out.
Jesse, well, let's definitely follow up. Looking forward to it.
Hi, this is Rosina Gallegos with US Bank. Thank you for the presentation. I know we work closely with you with Enterprise. A question on this conference for the tribal population. Could you give the information on the chat? Just kind of put the information when the conference is and the name.
I can get you that information. I don't know it off the top of my head. I know that there is we're having an internal retreat in August and I think in Idaho in preparation for this, but I actually don't have the dates in front of me of when it is, but I can get that to you, Rosina.
That sounds great. Thank you, Jimar.
All right. Well, thank you, Jimar, for your presentation. We appreciate your time and coming here and kind of sharing the great local work you guys are doing in the SoCal region. I know, I'm definitely committed to getting the information out to our collective members. So if there is any new programs released, anything that you want to make sure that the IE has a greater announcement, let me know, and I could connect it to our members in our newsletter and in our monthly meetings and so forth. So there's a number of communication pathways that we can ensure that the information is getting out to our region. So yeah. So I greatly appreciate you coming on and sharing Enterprise and the great work you guys are doing. And so we look forward to working more closely and alongside you.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for coming.
All right. Take care.
Mm-hmm. So then next we're going to be transitioning to a presentation from the group, which includes myself. Let me go ahead and share the screen and get this presentation up and ready. But last month, a group of us, three of us, myself, Damien O'Farrell, President and CEO of Parkview Legacy Foundation, Ruben Mendoza, who is a housing associate with Uplift San Bernardino, all went on a Vienna social housing study with LaSar Development Consultants. And spent 6 days there studying their housing market. And so just give me 1 second. It's hard to talk and get this all up and recording. I'm sorry. There we go. All right. There we go. Can you guys see it okay?
Yes,
Awesome.
we see it.
Thank you. Okay. 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 So sorry, I was trying to adjust it so I could better see my notes in the presentation. So I can't figure it out. So we're just going to go for it. But I have them memorized, or I have all my notes ready to go. So yeah, we just wanted to spend some time going over this report. And so we're going to launch it off into a couple different sections and highlight the trip, highlight the field study, some of the takeaways, and give a very general overview. Again, this is a 6-day immersion field study that included a lot of dense content and learning. And so what we're trying to do in this 30-minute period is give a high overview of what we are, some high level values, housing options, financing, the tools and things that we saw that was utilized best and that can best summarize the field study itself. So first, we're going to take a look at Vienna at a glance. Then we're going to go into some housing options, some of their housing programs, their values, the approach to housing, as well as some of their housing options and descriptions. Then we'll look at the financing and development tools and then some next steps and some options moving forward. So to start it off, Vienna, Vienna in itself, the country consists of 9 million residents, but Vienna itself is a city-state that is made up of 160 square miles with 2 million residents and 66,000 municipal employees. They're internationally ranked as the highest quality, the #1 highest quality of life. And so with that being said, there's a lot of intricacies to achieve that #1 ranking, that international recognition. And in comparison, in the IE, just to put into kind of perspective comparison, the IE itself is 27,000 square miles. And just in the county of Riverside itself, we have 2.47 million folks. And then in the county of San Bernardino, we have 2.19 million. So a total of 4.6 just in that IE. So in terms of the geographic area and the number of residents in itself is vastly different in comparison. So making that known, knowing there's a great difference in terms of the physical makeup, the number of folks in the geographic area is important to understanding how their housing model can be applicable to our so in Vienna, the average salary is about $56,341 in US dollars. And the renters make up about 80% of the general population, 80%. And so homelessness is essentially unseen, but we're not certainly understand why. We know that, housing's first, housing is a priority there. And there are people who are homeless, but our trip there didn't fully describe or analyze or show what is done with the unhoused, but we did see very few to little or to none folks that were homeless. And it's because of a lot of systematic safety nets that are put into place also. So in terms of social provision, there's subsidized housing, they have education, medical, transportation. There's 38 days of paid time off per year and 16 weeks of maternity leave. So 31 days and 16 weeks for maternity leave and 31 days for fathers. So it is, again, among the world's highest quality of life. So Vienna in itself, their social housing is described in Vienna as a rental housing stock provided at sub-market prices. So there's 53% of all rental apartments are social housing. So out of that 80% in total that are general rentals, 53% of those are social housing, meaning there's some types of subsidy provided to it. And then 60% of all residents live in social housing in itself. So with a general population of 2 million, about 1 million folks, or a little over 1 million, right, live in social housing in Vienna. So their housing stock is comprised of 220 housing units. 22% of the entire city's housing stock in itself is municipal housing. Their tax structure is so that 1% of all taxes, there's 1% tax on all salaries of all Viennese folks. And so that 1% is broken down into 0.5 is from an individual salary, and the other half is paid by their employer directly. So 1% of that goes towards filling or goes towards supporting a housing fund, which in my notes, it says I have the specific amount, and I believe it was 240 million in total annually that is put in to just build housing, to support housing and the building of housing and housing services. So in terms of like legal or just the public services that are available to them, in Vienna, tenants themselves or individuals have right from the city to legal services for housing, as well as tenant services. It's built in, it's a right, it's a service that is provided to everyone, no matter if you're a part of the municipal housing or other private market ownership housing options. It's a service provided to any Viennese individual. So the values and approach is kind of just stepping into this. You can understand that the values and approach to housing is much different than we see here. Our housing, it's not seen as, it's very much seen as an economic necessity, something that essentially like a human right, but an economic necessity. Each person, it's very person-centered with looking at the needs versus income, and there's much more social cohesion. Folks are prioritize housing. Everyone sees it as an economic necessity. And it's very much all the different units, all the different housing structures very much, and the residence itself demonstrate this social cohesion. So there's kind of two rules that drive this. There's two choices in terms of municipal housing towards, social housing, whether that is municipal housing or limited profit housing. And the housing approach is very middle class focused, in that individuals who want to access the municipal housing or just generally subsidize their affordable housing, social housing, it's 180% of the area median income, which is vastly different than what we see here. Many of our guidelines are around 80 to 100 or 120 to access any affordable housing programs. There, it's 180. There's no stigma attached to it. Small is fine. Also, many units vary. They have small units that are up to like 500 square feet, and most units are probably around 1,000 to 1,100 square feet for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath type of unit. And very much Vienna, the city state of Vienna, it looks, they're constantly planning ahead. Although their rate of folks moving into the region, or the need at which they have to build housing, it's much smaller than actually what we see in the IE, but they still work towards planning ahead and around vital conditions. So really looking at how do they build with consensus? How do they, build around people and all the different seven categories of vital conditions or social determinants of health, to ensure that people have access to different services to reach their full potential. So with that in mind, there's a lot of greenery, transportation, housing, health is all very much integrated into their housing. So there's both urban and green by choice. Builders build with those in mind. And their approach very much reflects the 5 pillars. The 5 pillars is a framework that was developed out of Berkeley. It's not necessarily something that that the Viennese say, oh, we build towards the 5 pillars, but it's a framework that is identified up there, in which they kind of focus their work in. The first P being producing housing for all, preserving vulnerable housing, as well as prevention of displacement, protection of tenants, and promote equity and inclusion. And this is their approach and values in which they build housing. Here's a quick glance at this greater map. The city of Vienna controls, and all these different departments are hosted within the city. That's why there's 66,000 employees. And each of these different departments focus on a certain type of or piece of the housing, of the social housing model. So there's Vienna Wohnen, which focuses on just the Viennese living. There's Wohnservice Wien, which is the resident focused. And then there's also Wohnfonds Wien, which focuses on the capital and housing funds. So because of this approach, because of this city and this intricacy in working together, they're able to build at a much more accelerated rate. So Ruben is going to jump in and tell us a little bit about the different housing options available.
Thank you, Mel.
Mhm.
So, as Mel mentioned, I'll be reviewing the different housing options that are made available in Vienna. And to the left, you'll see some quick numbers outlining the different housing stock for each of these different housing options that are made available. Next slide, please. Municipal housing constitutes a total of 22% of the housing stock in Vienna. And it's world renowned as one of the largest providers of city-owned housing. And it's located in all the districts throughout Vienna. In total, you have 500,000 people living there with 5,000 retail units, 1,300 playgrounds, 1,500 acres of green space. And I wanted to mention very quickly, 50% of all the land in Vienna, all of the lands in Vienna is slated for green spaces. I don't know how to say that German word, but Werner Wohnen refurbishes approximately 8,000 to 9,000 units per year so that they can be carbon neutral by 2040. Housing placement is facilitated by an online platform, and the household can choose 2 apartments, not 3, that's a typo. 2 apartments to choose from or face the end of the wait list. And there's an average wait time of 8 to 10 months for placement. In municipal housing, the rent is capped at 60 cents per square foot and in line with the consumer price index. And so an example of a 1,000 square foot apartment can only charge a max rent of $606. Next slide, please. Limited profit housing associations constitute 21% of the total housing stock in Vienna. About 58 of those administer 223,500 apartments. There's a total of 182 LPHAs, and they construct anywhere from 15 to 20,000 units annually. 1/3 of all newly constructed limited profit housing units must be smart units, and I'll explain that in the next slide. The profit is limited to, or I'm sorry, can you go back, please? The profit is limited to 2 to 3.5% for 50 years, and any surplus profits goes back into a revolving fund to construct additional limited profit housing units. And limited profit housing associations are restricted from taking excess profits in perpetuity. All APHAs must be member of an auditing association. The biggest barrier for entry is a down payment similar to what we would experience here for home ownership. And the city of Vienna provides 0 to low interest loans for households to have access to this housing. And the average wait time is a year to get in. Most of these LPHAs offer tenants the right to purchase units after 5 to 15 years of occupancy, and 30% of that stock is rent to buy. And what was interesting to me about that point I just made is that there's actually a lot of people that over time will own their apartment, but they'll hold on to it so that their kids could live there when they're old enough. And so there's actually like a lot of quote unquote like vacant apartments in Vienna, but they're actually tied to a tenant already. And limited profit housing is, the rents are determined by the cost of development while the developer is still repaying the loans. And the base rent decreases when loans are paid off and subject to rent control on a permanent basis known as basic rent. Next slide, please. And here just wanted to provide a quick graphic outlining the history of production. As you can see, in the early 1920s, municipal housing was gaining traction. but over time, limited profit housing has become more prevalent. And so as you'll see, from 2011 to 2019, there was no municipal housing built, but there was 42,716 units of limited profit housing constructed. Next slide, please. Smart units average a size of 754 square feet, and all large-scale developments must include 30 to 50% smart units. And these are primarily for lower income and vulnerable populations like single parents with children, young adults, students, seniors, or people determined by the city that require a higher housing need. The max rent cap in smart units are 74 cents per square foot. And these smart units are meant to incentivize practical downsizing. So rent is lowered for additional amount of people who are living in 3+ or more bedroom municipal unit and agree to opt into a smaller unit. And this strategy allows units to be available for families or households that need more space. Next slide, please. Here is a typical layout of what a smart unit would look like. And again, 30 to 50% of total large-scale developments are required to have smart apartments. And then the graph below will show you the amount of rooms and square footage and the maximum rent that they can charge. And so the one in the middle, again, the average of 754 square feet with 3 rooms would only run you an average of $558 a month. Next slide, please. Houseless populations in Vienna have the following services and resources available to them. In the winter, there are 980 beds available across 15 shelters and 200 to 300 beds available in the summer. Throughout the rest of the year, only people whose last, can you go to the previous slide? Thank you. Only people whose last residence before becoming unhoused in Vienna are allowed access to shelter beds. In order to access these shelters, there are pretty stringent criteria. You have to be currently unhoused. You have to demonstrate that you became unhoused in Vienna and show a rental agreement that originated within the city's boundaries. You have to be either an Austrian citizen, European Union citizen, or have a long-term residency visa. Austrian citizens must show proof of income or social security payments, while EU citizens must show proof of income only. Those that are refugees must have approved asylum status, and they're provided with accommodation from the state until their case is decided upon. Next slide, please. They have these 3 different kinds of housing for houseless populations, or those with very acute medical conditions. The first one, temporary transitory apartments, is a 3 to 6 month placement period for people that don't have access to public funds or social security entitlements. And the wait list can be anywhere from 4 days to 3 weeks. Housing First apartments offer a lower threshold for those with consistent acute homelessness and unable to maintain income. Low threshold temporary housing. If you have a medical condition with no medical insurance, you have a 1 to 2 year stay available with only a 3 to 4 days of wait time. Next slide, please. And then here I won't go into too much detail. Co-op housing is a thing in Vienna. There's 97 in total. The co-op housing is outlined in yellow, and you can see it's all integrated with the development of both municipal housing, smart units, and all that good stuff. And this is actually within walking distance of where we were hosted the whole week for the curriculum that was taught to us. And so we did get a chance to walk through this entire park and these neighborhoods. And one thing that I really liked about the tour is that they have a motto that says share, share, oh man, I forgot. It said, don't share fences or walls, something like that. So when you like walk this development, for example, all of the housing, it's not closed off from each other. It's open. You can freely walk through each other's space. And so it's just a concept to cultivate a social cohesion amongst the tenants that live there. Next slide, please. And the private market is very much a real thing in Vienna. It makes up 33% of the total housing stock. And as you can see, the monthly rents differ from municipal limited profit housing associations and the private market. And so because there's such a decent amount of supply in the affordable housing sector, it's able to have a price dampening effect on the private market housing. And that concludes my end of the presentation, and I will transition over to Damien.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben. Thanks, Melanie. So the reason that we went, and the reason that these trips obviously are being conducted by the Global Policy Leadership Academy is to simply get people there to help unpack and understand how they're doing it, what they're doing, and then be able to start to talk about what sorts of things we could replicate, at least along the West Coast is what their focus is on, right? So we have representatives right now that have attended from the state of California, and then also from Oregon. I don't know if anybody from Washington yet, but some things translate really well, and some things don't. And it's important also, and the reason that it's not an easy answer in terms of what to apply here is that it's not an apples to apples comparison, right? Some things that they do are a little bit similar to the way things are arranged here in the States or here in California, and some things it's just completely different. So we would have to translate a lot or make a lot of changes here first before what they're doing can even be applied. But the goal is that those that have gone and those that are interested in the concept at all and exploring it would further the conversation around those items and see what can be done here. There are models in the U.S., such as within Montgomery County. You can look up the Montgomery County housing model, and there's at least a podcast that I've listened to that goes over it and gives a pretty good example of in Montgomery County, outside of the DC area, what they're doing with their housing authority, where they're actually participating in the private market as the housing authority and purchasing units that then they own, they control to use for Section 8 vouchers and or other affordable units alongside the private owners, but in a majority position often, or at least as a partner in that project, which is then creating more public housing alongside private housing. And I think the important thing there, and what we noted in Vienna, and Ruben just mentioned it, is it's not an either or question in terms of do we do social housing or private housing. It's a both and that's what we were hoping to try to figure out. And there's different things that all of us can do to contribute to that. And we'll talk about that on the last slide, but I want to highlight just a few things that they do as a part of their entire package, in addition to just planning all this kind of together, right? They're thinking through transportation, and they're thinking through quality of life, thinking through environment, all of that at one time, kind of almost in one department when they're doing their housing. So it's an entire package, and it's also driven by the values. But a few pieces of the puzzle that really stuck out that may or may not be applicable here, right? Is that the limited partners housing associations, which are basically quasi nonprofits or much like nonprofits, housing developers here, are limited to charge their rent based on the cost of the build, right? So if price a building goes up, the rent goes up. Price of building is lower, rent goes lower, and there's a cap on how much they can charge. And it's essentially the reason that rent is charged is to cover the cost of the build and to put 2.3% profit on top of that into the developers, which happens to be a limited profit, more like a nonprofit developers' pockets year over year, until it seems, and there's still a little bit of research that we have to do on this, until the unit is all paid off, and then it can kind of transfer in some way. Also, a very unique feature that they use to control costs is in these units specifically run by the low limited profit housing associations, renters buy in at the front, so they're almost like a co-owner in some ways, but there's some $20,000, $30,000 that they either have to take in a loan that the banks loan for or save up to be able to buy in. So that's a very different type of model. We have a buyer or renter model, and then maybe condominiums is what we have. Somewhat like a land trust. There may be definitely some applications around there. The limited profit housing corporations or associations, one really unique thing is that they are required to build so many units per year, right? So the government of Vienna, the people of Vienna has basically said, hey, we need this much housing. If you're going to get the benefit of building it, then you have to commit to building it. But we're also not going to just make you do it on your own. We're going to give you the support needed to get you there. Sometimes that's the donation or the making available of land, brownfields, old train areas, an old airport, so on and so forth. So they make the land available, and then they make 1% loans available to the developers to help cover those costs and make it doable for the developers to do the holding costs. Go ahead, next slide. And then, as Ruben, I think, mentioned, there's that, and I also did too, that there's that 3.5% profit cap per year, and that's what everybody gets. So it's fair, it's competitive, but there is that cap, and anything in addition to that cap that's somehow made on the property because maybe they had less maintenance than they planned on goes into a revolving fund that they can then use to lend themselves at no interest for future projects, right? So it's truly like nonprofits are here, where any profit that's made goes right into the mission and the impact. Same thing for housing in their model. They do include the smart units, which makes it possible to hit their housing units and keep things more naturally affordable. And they use something that's called design build competitions, which I think has a lot of application here. A lot of people are already doing it, but they're really wanting to see the developers come up with the best way to increase quality of life and the quality of the buildings. And they use a strict process of criteria that they're looking to go with the best builder or the best project. Next slide. And so this is similar, right? The numbers might be different and some of the components might be different, but in terms of looking at that 3.5% profit cap per year, the way that's got to, as you can imagine, is the inputs or the revenue, which includes government subsidy of possibly land and cheap capital, the resident buy-in, the fact that they're able to build densely. Right, so there aren't a whole lot of super high-rise units, but the units are tall that they're building in the neighborhoods that makes use for green space, and that revolving fund. All that contributes to providing revenues that help cut down the costs and then cover the other costs that they don't cut down, which are very similar to the costs here. Maybe the regulations are different and the way that those are paid are different because it's kind of a more cohesive system. But then that ends up with the 3.5% in the revolving fund. And next. And so again, those are just some components. We have almost nearly 100-page briefing book that we're provided that we work our way through. It's very intense, and even after doing 4 of these, Global Policy Leadership Academy that has people that are heck of a lot smarter than me on all of this stuff are still trying to figure some of these things out, and that's why they're wanting to bring more bright minds to the table to do so. And so next steps, it's not on here, but we would love your input on this too. But for more people, especially from the Inland Empire, to attend this, we represented with the three of us. But the more representation that we can get, one, to help wrestle with the ideas and bring that stuff home, and two, to show representation so our area doesn't get forgotten if things do move forward, I think would be really good, especially amongst county and city staff who really are driving these projects. They're driving the ideas that are getting implemented in our cities and in our unincorporated areas. So the more people we can get from those areas, I think the better. Those that can't, there's going to be hopefully some opportunities for learning and brainstorming cohorts, both here locally, and then also that global policy leadership will bring together out of all the different cohorts and others. I think if once people get to a place of understanding the different parts and start to have some ideas, I think that coming up with some demonstration projects here locally in our region, areas of land, we've already begun to discuss between Melanie and Ruben and I some opportunities in a couple different cities that might be good. But then again, it's going to require people to have a basic understanding of what this is even talking about to be able to explore those projects. And then there's legislation and policy advocacy that's going to need to happen as well, obviously, for some of these ideas to ever be possible. And that's going to need to involve all stakeholders from all sides of the issue to make happen. So that's just some of the thoughts that we had for possible next steps. But again, would love to hear your ideas as well as your questions also. Ayako, just to answer your question very quickly. So government people who were on the trip, we had the principal planner and also principal business economic development persons from San Diego, the city of San Diego, were both on the trip. There was a council member who is timing out of her time on the city council of Santa Monica that was on the trip of this particular trip. The person that is now in charge of all affordable housing development in the city of Portland was on the trip. There was also a mix of developers and the most recent mayor of the city of Oakland, who happens to be running for city treasurer or state treasurer, was on the trip. I might be missing some other kind of city or elected officials, but that's who came to mind. So yeah, happy to answer any questions, or love to hear some feedback or thoughts, but I'll hand it back over to Melanie. Looks like Ian has a question.
Yeah, go for it, Ian.
This was fascinating. Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, maybe you covered this, and apologies if I missed this, but here obviously what we call affordable housing generally is based on your income, and your eligibility for that housing is connected to your income. Mm-hmm. Is it similar there, or is it really just everyone has access to this regardless of income, and then people sort of self-select the options that they want, or how do they deal with eligibility there?
So if I'm remembering correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Melanie and Ruben, but there is a limit, there's a cap on how much you can earn.
180% of it would be like 180% of the AMI here is what people can access and is considered middle housing. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then what the other things are based on need. So your size of family and things like that. So it's a little bit different approach to, rather than we're just going to give you a subsidy and, good luck, you're on your own. They really help people find a place that's right for them. And if their family situation changes, they're able to relocate. So that's a good thing. And then something that's very foreign to us, though, is basically once you're in a place, that's where you stay, right? There's not unless you start to earn more and then you get out on the private market, which certainly happens. You're pretty much where you're at until your needs change. So that's a very different way of kind of approaching life than we have here.
So to add on to that, sorry, Ian, did you have a question?
Well, I had a different question, but go. Go
just to
ahead.
add on a little bit to that. So folks like, let's say an individual, a single or a married couple or just partners they're applying for housing and want to access the housing, they can do so. And it's based off of their current income. And then they could they could get a new job, their salaries can increase by a significant amount, and their salary is not evaluated annually. It is just that one time. So folks who secure housing at a much younger age, if they need still just that one bedroom, they'll have it. If they want to go for like a 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom, maybe they're building a family, that's when their salary is reevaluated again. But what often happens is families that have a voucher, maybe they're eligible, and they have a 3 bedroom unit, they'll hold on to that voucher even when their children leave, until they're older, and pass that voucher down to their children too, because those 3 units. And so there's it's just, I don't want to say like it's a different game, but instead like there's a different approach to it. Specifically in that you can obtain a voucher for housing that can put your rent at $600 per month for the rest of your life if you want to. If you don't, and that's it, right? Until it's only triggered for that reevaluation of salary if you move like buildings and you need like a 3 bedroom, right? But if it's in terms of like accessibility or something like that, that isn't re-triggered. That's not, you'll just move units. So once you get that voucher, that's it, right? And so, and over, 80% of renters and over 60% use this type of Vienna itself use this type of housing.
I wanted to jump in real quick, Ian, before you ask your other question. One thing that we didn't talk about in the presentation is that you need to have Austrian citizenship or European Union citizenship in order to gain entry. So you must have lived in Vienna with the same address for a minimum of 2 years for Austrian citizens, or 5 years if you're an EU citizen or permanent resident. And if the individual generally has lived in Vienna for 5 years or longer, they can move up to the top of the waiting list. And there's other like stringent criteria, like for example, you can't have another rental or ownership property. Yeah, credit scores are not checked. Yeah, that's what I have for now.
Thank you. And then my other question was, you showed a chart where it broke down Vienna versus Austria as a whole country, and it looked like it was different. So I'm curious, from what you could tell, the Vienna is very specific to Vienna because of local policy decisions, political decisions. What is the role of like the federal government of Austria and then also the EU in all of this?
Good question about the EU. Don't know that relationship quite yet. So what we do know about Austria in general is Vienna as their city state is much more progressive than the rest of Austria, and also that the state of the country of Austria though does allocate, and help me out with the numbers, guys, but a certain number of millions of dollars to each city, state, or region, of which Vienna gets every single year. So they know they can plan ahead. We know we're going to get this allocation every year for our housing.
And they're a city state. So besides, they were formerly a part of like Lower Austria state, but then broke off into the city state, which then gives them much more power in terms of legislative and advocacy, and so, or just in legislation and policies that they create, which is different than the rest of Austria, which in comparison is much more conservative in comparison, but maybe not to other EU areas. The rest of Austria is probably aligned with those, but itself, they have full autonomy over, it's a city state. So besides the federal allocation, they have their city state allocation of 240 million annually towards housing, and part of that goes to the revolving fund too, to be used as loans for the developers, by the developers.
I also just wanted to point out, so there, I don't know if there's some other questions that we're missing, but Jay had asked the question about tracking demand for housing. And there's some unanswered questions within his question because of the number of people that they show commuting in. Some of those are even from out of the country, we learned. So, because they're only about 30 miles or whatever, maybe minutes from neighboring countries. So, some of that is different types of labor coming in. But one thing that really stood out to me is we went out to their newest development, which is still within the city state, but outside of the city center. And it's about a 20-minute rail line, which the rail line is awesome. But it's very, very progressive or aggressive in terms of their plans. It's basically kind of a city within the city. And they're thinking decades out. And the very first thing that they built before they even broke ground was the rail line and transit stations to the housing location. So that just gives kind of an idea of the way that they're approaching the whole way they go about development and planning.
Yeah, they built this community and they called it the train to nowhere because it just went nowhere for quite some time until they redeveloped it. And it was to this Brownsfield basically area of what, well, it was the former airport that Hitler utilized when he was coming in and out of Austria, that they demoed, and then they used the concrete to fill this pool, this basically huge pond, because in the summer it gets very hot. So they wanted to create some natural cooling method. And then built this other community around it. And many members that were a part of the Global Leadership Policy Academy staff were just like, oh, you IE folks are going to love this little like small region. Like there's so many applicable things to it, so it was really interesting to see that because it was the city within a city, and it's very slightly different approach or different variants of housing that was on essentially the border of Austria and Vienna, the city.
I think Jay has a question. Another one.
What did you see as far as the relationship between the commercial development and the residential development that they are producing on an ongoing basis? What's the interaction, or how close are they?
So commercial, there are all different types of commercial. So I'll share what I saw anecdotally because we didn't really dive into that too much. But one commercial in terms of shops and restaurants and all that type of stuff is built into the housing, usually on the ground floor of the housing. And they pride themselves on, it's not 15-minute walk because everybody walks differently, but I can't remember how many meters, but everything you ever need to get to public transportation, to get to restaurants, to get to grocery stores and blah, blah, blah is within 15-minute walk. So that's, and they intentionally design their neighborhoods in that way with the commercial on ground floors of units. Even the co-op units, some of them had commercial at the bottom. And then in terms of large scale commercial or industrial development, most of that happens outside of kind of the city center, but connected by rail. In the newest development that we were talking about, it was a few hundred yards away from one of their largest new car manufacturing developments, which may be in limbo in terms of what it's actually going to be producing now. But that was a very large manufacturing commercial unit that was right there.
Hey Mel, I wanted to ask if I could share my screen so I could show the different financing sources and what they're used for.
Yeah, while you do that, because I know we're wrapping up here, but yeah, I would love to have anybody, sorry, Mel, but I'm going to ask anybody that's interested in having further conversations on this just to email you and say, hey, let me know. And if we pull together a group, we'll be sure to include you in it.
Hey, Damien, real quickly, Austria is a democratic republic. So if anyone's getting an idea that there's something different, that's what they are. So my good question or my comment is, where is HUD in visiting Austria? Because they need to take a look at this. When I
Right?
Yeah. So they
Thank
have
you for. I was going to say thank you for that, and they're capitalists. So you know, they're not a there is no socialist country, but purely socialist. But they are certainly not. They have the private capitalist market. That's what they're driven on. They just incorporate other things into it.
Exactly. And so they actually do have another delegation going at the end of the summer, which is primarily focused on our elected officials and city state staffers. So hopefully there's been some momentum, and hopefully there's folks joining that. So
we're still overly dependent upon HUD in how we even the state of California is overly dependent upon HUD in making our decisions for us. And that would be an eye opener, I think, for some people at the federal level to see how they do that.
Yeah.
I want to touch on that. So I linked an article from HUD. So they acknowledge Vienna social housing program, but implementation is a whole separate question. And then recently I did note that Assembly member Alex Lee went to DC to do a presentation on the Vienna social housing model and the one in Singapore as well. So it's starting to gain momentum as what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So again, if there is anyone interested in just some conversations, please let me know. It's something that we're trying to just figure out what that means for our region, tapping into the cohort of folks that's gone before us 2 years prior, and then tapping into kind of that network that LaSAR has developed too with this field study program. So, but if you're interested in joining that conversation and seeing what that means, and you know, letting us share what we've, you know, kind of the building blocks of that, foundations, and where we think there might be some great pilot areas, you know, let me know, and you could send us an email, but send me an email and I could loop you into those conversations. But with one thing said, I think, and I'll speak for myself, but I do think Damien and Ruben would agree that this was a really like once in a lifetime experience, immersion experience to learn and just to see. Do I think that the Vienna housing model has everything considered? No, I think there was some stuff that we definitely saw. We had a lot of questions around race, equity, and inclusion, what that looked like, and just even access, and even the homeless. How do they truly house that? What is that network? So there's still some unanswered questions that I think are very relevant and near for us and a part of our work that aren't as integrated into theirs. But there's a ton of foundational tools and values and approach that we've gleaned from their housing model that we think that there may be some learnings for us in our region and what we can do to accelerate the production of housing and preserve housing in that. So with that being said, I don't necessarily feel like we need to go into each pillar like updates with such little time. But if there is anything highlighting that we want that any collective members or pillar chairs would like to just make known real quick, we have about 7 minutes left that we can kind of pivot and transition to that. Or people can drop notes or comments and continue to do so in the chat too. So. All right. Okay. Well, if there's no further comments, anything else from any folks, Damien or Ruben too? Okay, great.
I just really quick. I just wanted to say, I took pictures sometimes, like when we were looking inside like the actual physical building of the apartments, and like people leave like their electric scooters and bikes like outside of their door, like in the hallways. Like that's how much trust people have in each other in Vienna. And I think part of the narrative shift is going to entail like how can we stray away from like rugged individualism to like collective like ownership and like all that stuff of like shared spaces, housing, public amenities, so on and so forth.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to let us share. If you have more questions or want to learn more, I know we'd be happy to share more in detail and kind of get into more in depth. So as light as it might have seemed, it's only a light version of the details and learning that we had in the 6-day field study. So if there's anything else, I just thank you guys, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.